Hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to our October Empower panel, Beyond the Headset, the Humans of 911. We are so excited to have you here today. We have some folks who are live with us. If you are live, we can do it in the comments and feel free to chime in as we go. If you're catching this later, you may have signed back onto Crowdcast, or we have every single one of our Empower panels on our YouTube channel. If you've not checked that out yet, I'm going to put the link in the comments so you can catch every single Empower panel. Do we have any first timers? Let us know in the chat. And then additionally, we have the audio of every Empower panel is on Spotify, Apple Radio, Apple Podcast, sorry, Apple Podcast, and iHeartRadio. I just kind of merged those all together, I guess. Oh, we have a couple first timers. Fantastic. Well, Empower panels are done through 911 Wonder Women. We are a nonprofit organization that offers mentorship, education, and networking for the 911 community. We started doing Empower panels in 2022, early on. And the whole idea behind Empower panels is we like to dive into topics that we feel aren't talked about enough in our space. And we try to get folks from diverse backgrounds, diverse thought processes, bring them all together on one panel and just get after it. Talk about these things and answer any questions that you have. So if you do have questions, you can throw them in the chat as we go, because if you have that question, I guarantee somebody else does as well. And look, y'all, we have someone here from Canada. We are international today. Welcome, Tanya. Okay, I am going to disappear, and I'm going to hand the panel off to Valerie Minor, who is our marketing director here at 911 Wonder Women. And she's going to introduce these incredible women we have today at the panel. Before I do that, we have been having a couple technical glitches today on this crowdcast. So if that happens, just kind of bear with us. If you lose us in the audience, the very best thing to do is refresh your browser, because that helps a lot of times on this platform. So without further ado, Valerie, please take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Valerie. I worked some with Sarah through Wonder Woman and helped put some of these podcast episodes and such together. And if you are listening at the not live version, you may hear us referring to things in the chat. If you view it live, you'll be able to pull up a little chat version on the side. And it's kind of fun to be interactive with the host and everyone on the show and the other viewers as well. So that's just a little incentive if you ever do want to watch it live and have the time. Today with us, we have Dr. Katherine Meese. She works with UAB, which is also the school I work for too. She partners with us in our Office of Wellness, and she has an array of other endeavors. I'll let her introduce herself a little bit more. Also who works with her is Katie Sweeney, who shows up on the screen as Anonymous. Katie Sweeney has some experience from underneath the headset, and she now partners with Katherine Meese for, I believe it's a research assistant position, and she is doing some of her dissertation work to close out her Ph.D. soon. And then we also have Roxy Van Gundy. She is one of our rock stars in the 911 world. And she was the one who came to our mind for this podcast episode about the human margin, because Roxy's pretty much well known for her human approach and her heart-centered leadership. So if you don't mind, I'd like to go around starting with Dr. Meese, then Katie, and then Roxy. If you could just introduce yourself just a little bit further.
Yeah, so it's such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm Dr. Katherine Meese, and I have the opportunity to teach here at UAB in the School of Health Services Administration, and I largely teach organizational behavior and leadership, so how humans behave within an organizational context. My real passion is around well-being of healthcare workers and other first responders, and trying to understand what different dynamics or what different things in the workplace can help contribute to a sense of well-being for those folks. So it's really a pleasure to be with you today. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Katie, your volume is off again. I apologize, everyone. Like Sarah said, there's been some glitches in the program, the platform. I think we're going to skip to Roxy while Katie gets her volume sorted out again.
Hey guys, I'm Roxy. I am the director of 20 of the coolest people I know in Lyon County, Kansas. We are a small but mighty little center in Northeast Kansas. I've been in 911 for a little under 20 years. I've worked in Kansas and I've also worked in Alaska. So done a little bit of everything in this space, worked every position you can work. So I'm also, like Katherine, and really excited to have this conversation and see where it goes.
Thanks, Roxy. We're still having a little issue getting Katie's volume back on.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay,
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Katie. I am a Ph.D. student at UAB in the medical sociology department, and I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Meese in the Office of Wellness, so getting to conduct really great research, again, on human interaction and how people work together and how organizations function. But my primary research is on dispatchers and emotional labor. I worked as a 911 dispatcher for about 2.5, 3 years, both in Tennessee and in Alabama, so I have some different experience and different training environments and roles in both of those jobs. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and to kind of talk about 911 and also what it means to be a dispatcher and the human margin.
Awesome. So I hope just from those introductions you see why we brought these three key people together for this conversation. And it was all inspired by some work that Dr. Meese has been doing with her human margin work. And we just wanted to apply that to lives in the 911 centers and applying the human margin there. I was able to be a small piece in the cog of some research that Dr. Meese did on the human survey, on the human margin. And we put it together in what she named the Pulse survey, which is something she also built from the ground up. And here at our organization, and it's something that we're using to help find ways we can better the organization on levels across. And I'm going to stop talking right now and let her explain that more to you and see how that's going to hopefully help the future of employees at UAB.
Yeah, so I'm very blessed in the sense that I get to do a lot of fun and great research with a great team. And so we're constantly learning, and we're learning faster than we can get our work out into the world. But we've been measuring healthcare workers really since the beginning of the pandemic all the way through today. And so we've learned a few things over the course of that time, with the goal of trying to understand what are the things that we have control over, either as individuals or as an organization, to help improve the experience of these people that are entrusted into our care for 40-ish or more hours a week. And so some of the things that we've been finding that I think are possibly translatable in this context are, really that if we're thinking about the work of helping, right, which healthcare is very much a helping profession, as is the work that many of you do, the human element of that is the most important element. If I don't have people that can function well or function at their best, then we won't do the work well, because the humans are the ones doing the work. This is not equipment intensive, machinery intensive. It's humans connecting with humans for a purpose. And often humans that are in great distress. And so making sure, what I'm trying to understand is how can we make sure that those humans have enough margin, enough space in their lives and in their work to absorb the inherent difficulties of the work. Like, we know that the work of healthcare is hard, and people know that. They're signing up for it in a way. We know that the work that many first responders are doing is difficult. That's anticipated. But how do we make sure that we give people the conditions so that they have enough emotional capacity to absorb some of the inherent stresses of the work? And so that's what we're trying to understand, in a rigorous and scientific manner.
That's awesome. Dr. Meese, you put that together more eloquently than I could have, and I appreciate your wisdom in that round. I think one really cool thing with this episode today is Katie, because she does have the experience from being underneath the headset, and now she's working with Katherine on this organizational behavior endeavor. So, Katie, if you could put into your own words the human margin applied to dispatch centers and how you think, well, not only how you think it could be applied, but how it can create better outcomes for happiness and employee engagement.
Yeah, so we are actually doing some really great research right now on psychological safety and what that looks like in the workplace. And I think with the human margin, the kind of overall sense is that we want a positive psychological well-being and like a good psyche for all the employees, but also the supervisors. And research has shown that having better psychological well-being both at home and at work has led to better productivity, better job satisfaction than if you have low psychological well-being at home or even just in the workplace. So, if you were to, I think my main point is like having the recognition and of dispatchers. So before COVID started, only about 9 or 10 states classified their dispatchers as first responders, whereas now we're up to 20, which is really awesome. But Norman Torres, who I'm sure a bunch of people in the panel will know of, is creating the 911 Saves Act, who is trying to reclassify dispatchers as first responders. And that gives them this recognition. It gives them better pay. It gives them the opportunity to engage in debriefings or to have better access to the employee assistance programs. And all of these things together lead to a healthier work environment, to lower turnover, to higher levels of psychological well-being for the individual employee. But having that at work also leads to that outside of work. And if you're happy outside of work, that again influences how you are at work. And I think that is a really big thing that is being beneficial for dispatchers and for first responders, is having that classification of a first responder, because as everybody saw through COVID, it was really, really hard working through that. I worked through it. A bunch of people worked through it, and you're working long hours. You are hearing people go through the worst times of their lives, even more so than usual. And so having this positive, understanding of like, well, at least I'm being recognized for what I'm doing, I think is really beneficial.
And Roxy, with psychological safety and being a leader in your center, what are things that you suggest that leaders can do to give their staff members a sense of psychological safety?
Show them that you're a human just like they are, and you make mistakes, and that if they come to you with a problem, you're not going to be the first one to blame them. We're going to work it out together. I think that it's important that everybody knows that they can come to their boss and say, hey, I screwed up, and I realize what I did, but I want to tell you that I screwed up before you find out some other way. I think creating that environment where people feel free and safe enough to talk to you about the hard things is number one. We're recognized as first responders in Kansas, and for us, that doesn't really mean anything to anybody. And so we've had to work really hard here to kind of change some of the culture that we grew up in, and to change it into more of a family-like environment. I think psychological safety really takes away that paramilitary umbrella that we were all raised up under, and creates more of a family atmosphere. Because I do believe that, work-life balance, you can have a little bit of a life at work too. So I want to be the first one that somebody can talk to. I want to be the first one to cheer on my folks, be it a 911 thing they're doing great or something they're doing at home that's great. So for me, it takes on a couple of different forms. And I think if you're consistent in that endeavor and you're genuine about who you are and what you want your center to be, I think it can develop into something really great.
Katherine, did you come across components of psychological safety when you were doing the research? And what were some of the pressure points when it comes to that and how employees feel?
Yeah, so it's such an important concept. And I'm going to sort of build on what Katie and Roxy have shared, that, again, there's sort of the inherent difficulty of the work, which we expect. And there are all these conditions at work that help provide what I call psychological PPE, or protective equipment, for people in the workplace. And so those include things like psychological safety, which was mentioned, but also things like a sense of belonging, recognition, which doesn't always have to be top-down recognition, right? Being recognized or appreciated by my peers helps too. Building trust and confidence with my supervisor and senior leadership. And so those things tend to be quite protective when we think about, overall experiences with distress in the workplace. What gives me hope, or what makes me excited, is that those are all things that are free and that I can do as an individual. Like, I don't need permission from anybody higher up, left, right, or center, to tell me that it's okay to help reach out to my colleagues to create that feeling of belonging, to honor and appreciate the people around me, and to work on building my own trust relationships. And so some of those things statistically that are really important when we think about the overall stress picture are things that are within my grasp. And I think that's very empowering. One of the other things that we're seeing, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, is an increased incidence of post-traumatic stress symptoms. So I'm sure, as many of you are aware, we used to think that there was primary exposure to trauma, traumatic stress symptoms, and then there's secondary trauma, which maybe means being exposed to the details of someone else's trauma, which is very much a feature of work in healthcare, and both in the work that dispatchers are doing when you're hearing people's stories in distress. We now actually group this together because our response to those events is not as different as we thought it once was. So even just being exposed to the aversive details of other people's trauma can actually be a traumatizing event. And so we've seen, particularly in healthcare workers, that there's a rising of these post-traumatic stress symptoms, which is concerning, but it also makes us realize the importance of exactly what Roxy said, creating some of those vulnerable spaces where people can say, I'm not okay, and I need help. And maybe that's professional help. And so I think one of the other things that leaders and organizations can think about doing, very much like Roxy said, is normalizing that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to seek help. Many people in healthcare, and I imagine it is similar among this crowd, it's sort of a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, suck it up culture, particularly in certain populations where you go through very rigorous training. And so sometimes on the other side of that, it's not so easy to feel like you're allowed to be vulnerable. The other thing that we see happening that I imagine is somewhat similar is, people are exposed to really tragic suffering of others. And so sometimes there's this thinking that what do I have to complain about? Like, at least, it's not that bad. And there's almost a guilt around complaining or acknowledging your own suffering. And so I always like to remind and encourage people that there's not like a fixed pie of suffering, right? Like, if yours is more, mine is less. And so that kind of comparative suffering tends to not be beneficial. Sometimes that prevents people from getting the help that they need.
Wow. Another thing I liked from the research you did was some of the unexpected findings and some of the unexpected stressors and causes of burnout and such. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, so during COVID, we measured a bunch of different things, and we, so many of us had really significant stressors in our personal lives with, childcare, daycare's closing, and elder care, and other things like that, sick family members, etc. And then we had all this stuff going on at work where people were getting pay cuts, and they were, all this stuff was happening together. And what we saw largely is that the biggest things that were predicting overall distress were work-related factors. It wasn't the stuff at home. It was the stuff at work. And I think to Roxy's point, can you have a little bit of a life at work? Some people have a very clear-cut work-life balance, but for most of us, we live at work. Like, we're spending more time there than we are at home. And so those relationships become really important. And so when it's off, it really matters. One of the other things that we found that I think is sort of maybe it flies in the face a little bit of some of the rhetoric around mental health and well-being is that largely when we measured for individual resilience, it was not the main predictor of overall well-being, meaning it was like 9th on the list. So meaning that it wasn't that people aren't resilient or weak, it's that, we've got all this going on. And so I think sometimes, particularly in, professions like being a dispatcher or being in healthcare, strong people, brave people are self-selecting into some of those roles, right? A lot of us would just fall apart. We could never do the work. And so you're getting very resilient, very strong people that are coming into those roles. But sometimes the messaging is, oh, you're not doing well, your well-being's not okay, you must not be resilient, or you need to go be more resilient. And what our research has really continued to demonstrate is we probably don't have a lack of resilience issue, right? These are among some of the most resilient people on the planet. They still need help and support and care because they're humans, right? They need the things that humans need. And so I would say sort of another defining feature of what we found is really the importance of social isolation and loneliness and in worsening so many different outcomes that we're interested in. And so creating that sense of community and connection in the workplace becomes extremely important.
Thank you again. Katie and Roxy, in your experience in working in the centers, could you provide some examples maybe of things that maybe caused you some burnout or stress that may not be the typical things that we may think of? Because I know when I think back of my 13 years working in dispatch, a lot of the more cumulative trauma I took on wasn't per se some of the more, I don't know, Hollywood type versions that would be sensationalized, but more so the cumulative effect of it all. And I think working on our human margins, there's something about the cumulative effect of it all piling up. And I just wondered if there's anything that comes to mind for either of you that you could talk about.
Well, I think the easiest one off the top of my head, I think the public thinks that, dispatchers and first responders in general, they work there 5 days a week and then they go home and they rest. That's not the case. I think the public perception of that is a little skewed. I worked in a center where I worked 40 days straight and I didn't have a day off, all 12s. And nobody said thank you. Nobody said, hey, I see what you're doing. Hey, maybe that's not like the safest thing you should be doing. So I think that has an impact. But I also think for me, the biggest impact that I remember and always felt was that I always felt like as dispatchers, we were supposed to be the helpers. We were supposed to be the fixers. We were supposed to be the brave ones. We were never supposed to have any kind of feelings about anything. You were just take that call and move on to the next. Take that call and move on to the next. And I think never having somebody in my first, 10, 12 years to say, hey, it's okay that you felt some kind of way about that. It's okay that, you need a minute. It's okay if you want to go out and get a drink. I think that really impacted me, and it took me a lot of years to get over. I don't know that I'm still over it, but that's one of the things that I try really hard to be more cognizant of for the people that I lead. You know, it's all right to have human feelings because that's how we're built. But we just weren't trained that way in the beginning. And so I think that was the biggest impact for me as a young telecommunicator.
I think that's helped make you the leader you are today too, Roxy, and I appreciate that.
I agree with Roxy. I started dispatching when I was 21, and I did it until I was 24, 25. I took a year off in between Tennessee and Alabama. And in Tennessee, I went in and they had like a year-long training program, and I wasn't expecting the training to be so rigorous. I mean, I knew that it was going to be hard. I knew that there was a lot to learn about the job, but I was not expecting such attention to detail. And the attention to detail is everything, because you have to pay attention to your surroundings, to what you're listening to your other dispatchers, to the other people on the radio, to your officers, to your firefighters, to everybody. And you also have to multitask while doing that. So it's this kind of, my main stress that I found that I feel like I wasn't expecting is that I'm already a perfectionist, and coming in here, you really have to be a perfectionist, because if you're not, somebody's life is on the line. And so if you make one mistake, your job is on the line. At least me, I always felt guilty, even as a trainee, like, oh my goodness, if I make this mistake, this is on me, and I could ruin somebody's life by making one simple mistake. If you hear something wrong, if you type in one, number on an address incorrectly into a call card, it could all be different. But I had a really great experience in Tennessee training, and so I wasn't too worried about that. And then I came to Alabama, and the training program was much, much different. We had about 2 months total to learn everything, and they were a much larger center, and it was a lot more pressure to be perfect after and not having a lot of time with your trainer. And so I think, again, as Dr. Meese has mentioned, having these relationships with your supervisors or your mentors is really important, because in Tennessee, I got that, and I was able to succeed, and I was able to feel like I was making a difference in this dispatch center, and that I was able to do the work that I felt like I was being called to do and to help people. And then in Alabama, I didn't have that relationship with my supervisor because they were just as busy, and we were so short-staffed that it was just, learn this, do this, you're on your own. If you make a mistake, it's on you. And so that was a lot of pressure to live with, and that was one of the reasons that I ended up leaving, because I was so worried about other people's lives. And which is, again, this is why I'm doing research on it, because I know that so many people go through this, and that half the time we see that if there's training groups of 4 to 8 people, maybe only 2 will stick around. And even after a year, probably one of those has left. So the turnover is incredibly high. And I know, because I left the job for the same reason. And so I feel like it's incredibly important to really recognize that these relationships are really, really important to maintaining a healthy work life, because if you don't have them, you're isolated, you're lonely, and you are dealing with this guilt all by yourself.
Katie, do you mind telling us a little bit more about what your research goes into, and if there's any opportunity for others to help or work with you and any results you may need?
Yeah, so for my master's thesis, I actually looked at, I was the first sociological study on 911 dispatchers, so that was pretty awesome. And so I just did kind of a basic survey, and I asked everything from demographics to how many hours people worked, what their classification was, to what kind of job role they had, just to get a basic overline of kind of what dispatchers are doing across the states. And so for my dissertation, I'm going to do essentially the same thing, but it's going to be post-COVID. And I'm going to be looking at emotional labor, because for dispatchers, I mean, it's in the job description. You have to keep calm. You have to remain calm. You have to have your emotions under control. And suppressing those emotions is really hard when you're hearing somebody else go through the emotions, because, it's the human way to want to be empathetic and sympathetic, but you can't do that as a dispatcher. You can, but you still have to be able to control it enough to do your job correctly. And so I am looking at emotional labor and how that takes a toll on people's mental health and physical health. I'm also looking at gender discrimination in the dispatch centers, because there's a lot of stigma around men versus women. And, women historically were the dispatchers because it was a secretary role. Women can answer the phones while men are out there doing the actual first responding. And so we've seen a lot of this change over the years, and I really want to look at that as well. But in the next year, probably I'll do my proposal in the spring. And so by next fall, I'll have a survey that'll go out. And yeah, if anybody wants to take it, I'd love to send it to your centers. I would love for everybody to pass it around. I want to get as much information as possible because I think it's really important to understand the mental well-being of dispatchers.
Yeah, it's very important. And when the time comes, we'll definitely get that link from you and we can send it out through our platforms.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Meaningful work, what you're doing. And I really love that I had the opportunity to bring you onto this and talk about it. I wanted to go back to Dr. Meese for a minute, and something she said in her work about how creating a culture where employees can flourish is essential. And I guess my question for Dr. Meese is, how does the positive environment affect work in general? How does that help one flourish?
Yeah, so there are several different models of flourishing. One that I like, just because it's easy to remember, is called PERMA. And so that suggests that flourishing happens when people have positive emotions, when they're engaged, when they have good relationships, meaning, and achievement. And so some of those things can happen outside of work, right? You can have those in other areas of your life, and that helps you. But so many of those things happen at work. And if they're not happening at work, then we feel a loss, or we feel that something is missing. And what I also like about that model is there are opportunities for many of us to help support those different elements. So for example, we can cultivate positive emotions through a habit of practicing gratitude, for example, or appreciating the people around us, expressing gratitude to others for their presence, their contribution to the team. I'm a big fan of words that you can use, or phrases. I love a good catchphrase. When my son was licking the handrail in the bird section of the zoo, I needed like a good catchphrase, like not food, And so one of the catchphrases I like to do to think about appreciating others is, on your team is, I love the blank you bring to this team, and you can find something positive about anyone by, using that. Even if it's, I love the way you completely ripped my article to pieces on this team. I mean, you can find something. I also think that, those elements of belonging and recognition are so important, and those are things that happen in the workplace. And then also making sure that employees are not a source of discrimination, of toxic corporate culture. Gossip can be hugely damaging for people's experience at work as well. So you have a responsibility to be accountable to those standards and to hold each other accountable. I think the last thing I would say that I'm learning more about and so intrigued is this idea of mattering. I can feel like I fit in with my colleague, I belong, I've got some friendships at work, but I can still feel ultimately that either the work company doesn't matter, I don't matter, my ideas don't matter, my time doesn't matter, my well-being doesn't matter. And if I'm getting that message from work, you don't matter, it's hugely diminishing for people's overall sense of well-being. And so I have found that even just saying it, you matter to me, you're not replaceable. Mattering is that feeling of not being replaceable, or we missed you, right? And so I think particularly in roles like this, and we see this in healthcare as well, a nurse will struggle and a nurse will leave, and we're like, well, we'll just get another one. And that sends the message to everybody that's left that you're replaceable, right? You are just, an empty seat, a seat that's not empty right now. If it becomes empty, we'll refill it. And I think that can really diminish people's sense of mattering. And so I think that particularly also for roles that are behind the scenes, I think that mattering element becomes a lot more difficult, right? What you're describing is very much heroic, but behind the scenes work. And so the people who understand most that work matters are the people that are sitting right next to you, right, to the right and left. And so I think we also have a responsibility to help people matter and feel that they matter.
Well, thank you. Roxy, in the 911 centers as a leader, how do you think you can help people feel that they matter? How do you think that you can build more belonging or have recognition programs that actually have meaningfulness to them.
I think that the easiest thing you can do is just get to know them as humans, not just a line item on your employee list. You know, do they have kids? Do they have hobbies? Do they have things that they're really good at? And ask about them. I also think that it creates a sense of belonging when you get in front of them every day, or at least somewhat frequently. You know, people on night shift like to joke that we don't ever see anybody on day shift. We don't ever see the director on day shift. You know, if they call me, I'll come. If I haven't seen them in a while, I'll come in early just to be here. You know, so it's just really important, I think, to get to know them as actual people outside of the center, but to also get that face time with them. I think employee recognition programs scare some people because they think money, money, money. And it's not that. You know, it's just saying, hey, you did a great job, Valerie. Oh my gosh, you did so good on your QA this week. That's all you had to do is acknowledge it. Put it up on social media. You know, maybe write somebody a note that you stick in their box and say, hey, I've seen you be so kind to the trainees this week. I'm so proud of you. Thank you for doing that. I think recognition programs can be crazy amazing, but they can also be those small intentional things that you do just to say, hey, I just really appreciate that you're here, and I can't imagine my life without you. I wrote a note to one of my employees the other day that just had a little snack size Halloween candy bar on it. And I said, I don't know what if we knew we needed a you, but now that we have you, I can't imagine our team without you. You know, I think that those little small things and that tiny time investment just make a world of difference.
If I can build on what Roxy said, and those are such beautiful examples, like that's exactly it, right? Helping people matter. New big research study out of Gallup showed that people who have high recognition cultures are those that take time to frequently appreciate little things. And so very much to your point, Roxy, it's not always these grand, you know, big award of the year. A lot of times, sometimes it's just appreciating people for showing up, like you said, because you know what? They're not taking that higher paying job or that easier job at Amazon or remote or wherever it may be, you know. It's a good job market right now. And so sometimes showing up is worth appreciating. You know, we don't always earn it or earn recognition. Appreciation is just appreciating someone for who they are.
And the appreciation doesn't have to cost money. You know, being kind, letting people know that you care about them, those things don't cost money. I know in a lot of 911 centers, it's hard to find money sometimes when we're trying to look into recognition programs, but I think we found a lot about pizza parties. We don't really feel like we matter a whole lot when our award is a pizza party. So I think we're kind of moving away from those, and we're trying to spend more time on what matters. And Dr. Meese, you also talk about being able to bring your best self to work too. And I know when I can bring my best self to work, my work product is a lot better. And when our work product is helping to save lives, I think bringing our best selves to work is something that we need to feel that we can do. Sometimes we aren't provided the best scenarios to bring our best selves to work, though. Sometimes we aren't afforded the rest we need in between shifts. Sometimes the rest isn't just physical, but it's mental too. So Katie, how do you bring your best self to work? And what are the outcomes when people do bring their best selves?
Yeah, so
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. As I mentioned earlier too, and as Dr. Meese was saying, and also as you just said, Valerie, too, having your best self at work and also seeing other people being their best selves leads to better productivity and to better job satisfaction and to lower turnover rates. And I think one of these things that Roxy has demonstrated very well as being a leader in the dispatch organizations is having a leader show you what that looks like. If you come in and your leader is miserable or your trainer is miserable, you're not going to want to like have fun. You're not going to want to be engaging, or you're going to be in a good mood. But if you have somebody who comes in, it's like, I'm here for you, you can do this, I know that you just had a hard call, but let's talk about it, let's get you back on the floor, you're going to do great. You're going to continue to be your best self because you're wanting that recognition and you're wanting that approval, because everybody wants approval. And just having that, even if it's just like minimal, like you're doing a good job, that means so much to people. And especially, you made the comment, Roxy, of in the night shift, people don't always see everybody else. And that's true. And I just cannot talk highly enough of the center that I worked for in Tennessee. Our dispatch leader, like it wasn't just like the manager, but the person who oversaw the communication center, he would come in at least 2 or 3 times a week on night shifts to make sure that he saw everybody who worked on night shift. And he wouldn't just drop in to say hello. He would come in and he would sit with us for hours and just make sure that like we were okay, and if we needed anything, and if any of us needed to swap out for day shift because we had an appointment or anything like that. And so just having somebody see us as humans was so beneficial and just really made us all, we had a great time on night shift because we did feel seen. And when I moved to Alabama, they didn't have that. And you could just tell there's such a difference in people who feel seen and who feel like they are being approved of and who feel like they're doing a good job, compared to those who just feel like, well, I'm here, I guess, and I'm doing my job, but that's all I have to do.
Roxy, do you feel that being the heart-centered leader that you are, do you think you've seen a difference in your employees being able to bring their best selves to work? Do you think that being a leader that focuses more on the well-being of each individual, if that betters your organization as a whole?
Yes, I do. Being a heart-centered leader, I guess I don't really understand what that is. That's just me. I'm just me. And, I love my folks and I try to help them understand that I know exactly what they're going through and I'm here to make any obstacle I can for them go away. But I think just creating safe environments and being a person who is open about my struggles and open about, the things I've had to do to get onto the other side. I think that helps people feel different. And I think it helps people see that we're different. And, I say sometimes, if we all go down together, we're a family. We all rise together and we all fall together. And, I think that if you create those spaces where people feel like they're not going to get yelled at the second they do something wrong, and you create those spaces where you're like, hey, Katie, you're awesome. I love your shirt. That's so great. If you create those types of environments and you just recognize people for the great things they're doing, it just all comes together, but I know that there are people who say, well, I've tried to be nice and it just hasn't worked. It's a marathon. You have to do it every single day. You have to be intentional about the fact that you're going to lead with joy and lead with your heart and make the happy decision versus, being upset. And, there's a lot of things, Katie and Val, you both know there's a lot of things that make it easy to choose violence, make it easy to choose anger, make it easy to be horrible. But if you make that point every single day to try to make it better and try to be something different, I think everybody wants to get involved in positive and good things. So I don't know any other way. So
Your answer is so genuine. And I think I may have put you on the spot with my title of you being the heart-centered leader, but that's just how I've always seen you.
Well, I love you. You're the greatest.
Well, everyone wants you for their leader in so many centers, and I think that speaks volumes of you. And I do want to open the chat up if people have questions for any of the panelists. I did want to ask Dr. Meese if she could talk a little bit more on mattering and maybe things that leadership can do to help others feel that they matter. I know a lot of times in our work, sometimes when we lose the sense of purpose, that sometimes makes our mattering go downhill pretty quickly. And I don't know, just what do you think we can do to stay on track with feeling that sense of purpose, maybe from a leadership perspective?
Yes, that's a great question. So one of the key roles of a leader in this instance or for this element is to help pull people sort of out of the ditch, right? Out of the doom and gloom, to keep looking up, keep heads high, and reconnecting them back to the meaning and purpose in what they're doing. In the healthcare context, people are doing documentation and putting things in patient medical record, and they're experiencing violence from patients, and all these things that are happening that get in the way of them remembering that they're changing lives with every minute they spend in the job. And so, I'm a big fan of the power of storytelling. We are sense-making beings, and we often take, sort of disconnected pieces of information and weave it into a story. And so sometimes that story gets woven into one of you don't matter, you're not making a difference, et cetera. And I think the leader's job is to help connect those points in a way that reminds people of their mattering and of the meaning in the work that they're doing. Sometimes that is taking, one specific example where the team's contribution led to a positive outcome and bringing it up at meetings and reminding people like, I know some days you probably don't feel like you're making a difference, but never forget this thing, right? And so setting up sort of some stories of remembrance is important. I think it also helps when you bring in new people to the organization or to the group, that you can sort of get them up to speed on here's what we do and how it makes a difference. The other element I think that's helpful with that meaning is not just how are you making a difference in the people that we're serving, but how are you making a difference to each other, right? I saw you do this to your coworker. I saw you give your coworker a hug when they were struggling at the end of a really difficult call. That made a big difference to them. I could see it in their body language. Like that mattered. And so just reminding people and telling them directly.
We still have a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions that are listening today, they want to put out to any of the panelists, or they have any thoughts they wanted to maybe give us to speak on.
Val, I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Could you hear my son banging on the door earlier? Sorry. I can't really figure out how to mute in this.
It's okay. We're all human.
Yeah, my kids don't have school today. So Roxy, earlier you were talking about kind of your personal journey of recognizing things within yourself when it comes to like when it's time to take a break or when it's time, when you need help. So now that you can kind of see that in yourself, does that make you as a leader able to see it in other people, knowing that everyone's different and signs may look a little bit different from person to person, but are you able to kind of recognize that earlier than maybe you used to before you did that self-discovery?
Yes, because I think for me, a lot of times when people come and they're like, I have this big problem, crazy, I'm so mad. I take a second and I try to assess, is this because it's really that big of a problem to them, or is there more happening? You know, a lot of times when I felt really burnout and really overloaded and really disconnected, that came out as anger for me. Another thing is sleeping. I'm not a great sleeper. It was worse when I felt really overwhelmed and burnout. And so, you know, I try to take notice of that. Like, hey, Valerie, you look like you're pretty tired. Did you get some sleep last night? How are things going? You know, like make that an opening. Um, Nobody ever asked me. Maybe you ask and they say, "Oh, I'm fine." But you know, if somebody would have asked me, that would have made such a world of difference in my life. So, if I can ask somebody if they're okay and if I can support them in some way, that's what I want to do. So, there have been a lot of times where I've just thought, you know, is this really what this is, or is it something else? And I think just trying to care makes a huge difference.
I agree.
I really like that. Trying to care. And also, I think it shows as a leader, we have so much self growth to do as
Right.
well.
Right.
Others.
And we're so busy. You know, it's very easy for me to have 55 things on my to-do list, but if I don't notice the times when they need me to stop and pay attention, then what am I doing here? You know, so, you know, take those cues from your past and look for those in other people, and try to make it better that way and treat people a little better than you were treated. That's the way we're gonna make 911 different.
And then one more thing, kind of in that same vein, I saw somebody in the comments mention that they recently started therapy. And I don't like doing any of these panels without saying therapy is so important and such an incredible tool. You know, 911 specifically, and for leaders and people who are wanting to be leaders. You know, I started therapy a couple of years ago, and I think that's clutch in kind of doing what we're talking about. Like if you can, you know, I think recognizing what's going on beyond the surface is the first step to helping people do the same, you know, and helping lead them. Because there's things that you discover about humans in general going through therapy, right? That is just this, you know, how our brains work. And, you know, it's not that we need to be more resilient sometimes. It's we need to figure out what's going on with us, right?
I'm not sure I've ever met a grown up that wouldn't benefit from therapy. So, you know, I just think there's sometimes a misperception that you have to be really in a bad way before you should seek help. And it's, I think, helpful for anyone to identify patterns of thinking that are not serving them. And so don't wait too long before you start. I'm so proud of that person. It's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to refer people sometimes, but I think that might be rude. Therapy.
How can we do that? Y'all, no, that's great, Roxy. How can we help people find therapy that, you know, without being like, hey, you're crazy. You know what I mean? Like, what's some language? Like, what are some things we can do to gently?
Sometimes I bring it up in conversation, like at random, like, you know, I have a great therapist, and sometimes, you know, before I could be a little aggressive in how I talk to people, and she really showed me that comes from X, Y, and Z. I think if you normalize it in the conversation, that puts those little seeds in somebody's brain, and eventually I think they would go forth and water them. I would hope so, but I just try to normalize it in conversation and not be rude about it, even though I might want to.
Dr. Meese and Katie, do you have any nuggets in that vein? Any kind of suggestions to help us over
Yeah,
here?
I mean, I'm with you. There have been people that I would love to say, hey, I made an appointment for you at Tuesday. Not coffee with me, it's coffee with my therapist. But obviously we can't do that. I do think the normalizing it is so important. And I think modeling, like taking care of our own selves, right? And modeling going to therapy and getting good sleep and taking care of my social connection so that I don't feel isolated. I mean, all of those things are things that I think leaders have a powerful voice to their employees when they model it well.
I agree. And I think too, I know that I've like mentioned training a lot, but it's because the majority of my 2.5, 3 years was spent as a trainee in these two different places. But I think having these leaders and trainers and mentors start that encouragement of like, yes, you're training and you're seeing all these things, but you like start it now. It's okay. And it's normal to go to therapy, and it's healthy to go to therapy. And even if you feel like you don't need it, it's just good to debrief and to talk through things, because not everybody's going to understand. Or even if you don't go to therapy, talk to somebody else who's been through it, like talk to your supervisor. If you're not comfortable going to therapy, talk to your supervisor, debrief, go through these things. So I think that's just really important to be able to feel like I can talk about this.
I like to tell people it's kind of like a soda bottle that you shake up, and if you don't slowly release the cap, then it's going to come out in weird ways. And so therapy is one way of slowly releasing that cap, right? And as a support, like Katie has mentioned. And so we can also work on equipping our teams around what does effective peer support look like. There's some good free online training for that.
We're coming up on our time. We didn't get a lot of questions from the audience, but I'm going to presume it's because these wonderful panelists answered everything. I did want to do a little round, and if each person could just like leave one statement that if you could tell anyone listening today something important to hear today, what it would be. And I'm going to remind the listeners that if you go to the 911 Wonder Women LinkedIn page and you look for this ad, you'll be able to find that we've tagged all the panelists in here if you wanted to connect with them on LinkedIn or follow them. I know Dr. Meese has some great articles that come out through there that I really love reading, and I think you would probably enjoy them too. One recently about mattering. But Roxy, if you could only leave one little nugget of wisdom today, what would you say?
I thought I was going to have time to think about this for a minute.
You got it.
I think that you matter and that you're a life changer regardless of how you feel. The work you do is important. And if nobody tells you that, then please reach out to me, because I'll tell you that every single day or whenever you need, because everybody needs to be told that somebody would miss them if they weren't here.
And everybody needs a Roxy in their corner. Thank you, Roxy. All right, Katie, what piece of wisdom would you leave?
I think specifically with my research in emotions, I think it's important to recognize that the emotions of your callers are important, and maintaining your emotions to take care of them is important, but you are still valid in your own emotions and your own feelings. And just because you have to answer the next call does not mean that you cannot take a moment to just sit in those feelings and let yourself be human.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Dr. Meese?
Mine, yeah, just never underestimate the difference you make. You may not see it, but never underestimate the difference you make.
Thank you so much. Well, let's see. Katie left her email in the chat. She's, looking for participants to help her next year and the years to come as she closes out her dissertation. Again, feel free to connect or follow our panelists, follow what they're doing. I think you'll see some surprising stuff with some of them. And I'm going to let Sarah close us out.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everybody. Again, you can find a copy of this recording. You can come back here anytime to Crowdcast on our YouTube channel. It'll be up in a couple of days, and on our podcast, as well as previous panels. If you have an idea for a panel, please reach out. I'm going to put Amanda at Val or Amanda. Actually, Val, I'm going to put your Valerie at 911.com. And if you are interested in being a panelist also for your topic, you can email us and we'll be in touch. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Keep doing what you're doing. We're here for you, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.